can definitely not see myself forgetting to replace this with the vented cap when doing runs. Welcome back to my garage. I think a little bit of explaining is in order. You saw me soldering an octocoupler circuit to take RPM directly from the Ignitec ignition unit. Seems to be working really well. You saw me tightening up the chains. You saw me replacing the fuel tank for a larger one. You saw the PID loop kind of working. What I did was divide all the numbers by 25. Since the retarder is run at 25:1, but the software think it's running 1:1, means with normal numbers it would grossly overreact to RPM changes. Feels close now, just a little bit of tuning and it should be workable. We've developed a misfire though, out of nowhere. I really can't see where that came from. I've moved the ignition unit around. Maybe some wires are crossed now that shouldn't be crossed or something. Could be one of the reed valves either broken or on the verge of breaking. That's a possibility. They're doing that live fast, die young thing. Rebels. I've made some major changes and in the process made a huge mess here. I'll bring you down to the floor and I'll show you what I'm working on now and the rest of the changes. Remote push-pull throttle with the blower and a slide carb. The slide sticks. That's why I need push-pull. I 3D printed this adapter thing to make the carb push-pull and I made this. I also removed the old wooden test stand. I wasn't using the gauges anymore and there wasn't really any use for it. 5-liter fuel tank versus 1. Longer runs. It's on a light stand now and higher. Might make it run rich. This isn't a float carb. It's directly fed from the tank. We'll see. I also cleaned up the wiring. It might not look like it, but now everything is spaced properly apart and should help minimize interference. I'm packing up for today. I need to go pick up my kids at school and stuff. Just a quick thought, not really related to anything at the moment. I think there's room for 4 spark plugs in my combustion chamber. The whole combustion chamber would be spark plugs. Imagine 4 of these pointed towards the middle. I think the turbulent edges are small enough so that we would create 4 separate flame fronts, which would collide and could probably cause some detonation, but maybe not. Maybe the chamber is small enough so those 4 flame fronts act like one, kinda. Would be a poor man's HCCI ignition. Tomorrow we'll clean up the place and start testing. The next day I've cleaned up the place and the engine is soon up to temperature. I also moved the kill switch to here. Better for remote shutdown in case of explosion and fire. I've got this thing hooked up to monitor spark. I've increased the KP factor of the PID loop slightly. We had a slight overshoot in the start there. And I've set the ignition to 20 degrees before top dead center. Flat line. My reasons for doing flat lines is I can do a bunch of them when everything is working and stitch together a curve with the best ignition advance for various RPM points. We're seeing beautiful results now. The dyno is working properly. My thermocouple temperature sensor is not too happy with running a no resistor cap though, as you can see here. The readings are fairly erratic. We can see a steady rise from 13 horsepower at 8,000 RPM to around 21 at 11,000. Then it drops down to about 19 at 12,500. That's when I aborted the runs. Might actually be able to rev it higher. This is with 20 degrees of ignition advance. We could jump straight to trying 25, or we could retard the rotary valve one notch on the belt and see what happens. Just remember, we had some higher power readings when the drive was slipping. It's worth investigating. We'll try that now. If we're running out of blowdown and the cylinder isn't as purged of exhaust gas as we want it to be when the blower starts pouring in new mixture, there might be more mixing than ideal. We should be able to see if that's happening by retarding the closing of the valve. Then there's more time for the blower to purge the cylinder before the valve closes. Worth a try. This isn't ideal because now the valve hasn't fully uncovered the exhaust duct when the exhaust port opens. It'll work for a test though. If we gain power, we'll cut the valve. Never mind the mess we're seeing here, that's just the engine being at the same RPM point several times. You can see results versus time. You can see there's nothing wrong here. We lost power all the way. It makes me think I should try doing it the other way around, closing the valve earlier. We're getting some really interesting results now. You can see the blue graph here. That's horsepower for our first runs with the rotary valve set at what it's been always set at. That black line, that's with the rotary valve 13 degrees retarded, close and open later. You can see we lost power throughout the range. Purple line, that's with the rotary valve 13 degrees advanced, closing 13 degrees earlier. You can see it's pretty much the same as with the valve at the base setting. Look at this brown line, that's with the rotary valve 13 degrees advanced, but with a resistor spark plug cap. I noticed the dyno controller was getting a bad connection at higher RPM. There's this status notification thing showing you. Also the temperature sensor gave us some nice hints. You can see the brown line here is much smoother. That resistor plug cap, that lost us power. This is with the same rotary valve and ignition settings as the purple line. I also noticed it was misfiring more with the 5K resistor cap, and I could see it on this box. Loading up at low RPM and misfiring. Doesn't seem to do that at higher RPM, but I think that's just because you can't notice it because it happens so fast. I think it is spark capping us here. I think actually we would have made more power when I was closing the valve earlier, but spark couldn't cope. And it got worse with the resistor cap. That's my theory. I'll sleep on it. Just noticed something. For all the runs where power is lower, pressure is also lower. You can see this baseline run, and pressure is consistently higher than this run with the 5K resistor and lower power. This run with the rotary valve 13 degrees retarded, lower pressure. Now look at this run. Almost the same power as our baseline, same pressure. This brown one, same configuration as the purple one, but with the 5K resistor. Lower power, lower pressure. Lower power, lower pressure. Lower power, lower pressure. Higher power, higher pressure. Maybe I should try removing the dump valve. It's not doing much work now with the stiffer spring and that pulley ratio. Would mean removing my fail safe though. Large amount of fuel puddled up in that valve. I'm wondering if that might have caused it to open earlier. Let's just remove it and see how things behave. There's lots of fuel sitting here. I was initially just going to put a drain valve here, just like this one, and drain it occasionally. I think a catch tank is better, just temporary. If we're not going to run a dump valve, I'll redesign the piece in between the case and the blower, without that stub and big cavity for the blow-off valve takeoff. There will still be fuel puddling, but now I'm hoping it'll end up here and not interfere too much with mixture strength and spark. We'll see. You saw this thing popped off in the last run. That's why I made it smooth, so that it would do that. So that's my failsafe. This is the weakest point here. Probably was a backfire at really high RPM. We might have destroyed the reeds. I'll show you the results. We're rising up to about 19 horsepower at 10,500 RPM, and then we stay at a flat line all the way to 15,500 RPM. I've revved it higher today. There's actually a slight increase, more power, around 14,500, 15,000 RPM. About that misfire or whatever happened, check the plug, it's fine. Looks like it's running a little bit cold. We are running lower pressure though, I'll get to that. Check the compression up against my 140 PSI baseline. It's still the same, so that's good. I have a suspicion we blew the reeds once again. That backfire happened at really high RPM, where blowdown is becoming insufficient, and there might be much higher pressure when the reed valves are uncovered. Here's a comparison between one of the first runs yesterday and one of the last ones. Power is the same with or without the dump valve at the same pressure, which means that dump valve wasn't doing anything anymore with the stiffer spring. It's the pulley ratio bringing us the pressure we've got now. Pressure is consistently lower than one of the early runs yesterday. So something happened with the pressure. The pressure has gone somewhere. But where? We've lost like 4, maybe 5 psi across the board. Where did that pressure go? I should check for leaks. Hoping it's not the blower being worn out from abuse. By the way, our exhaust cracked once again. It didn't crack in a weld now, it cracked like in the heat affected zone. I think I welded it too hot. I'll go over all the bolts, checking if they're tight, and I'll be back with the verdict. And then we'll have a look at the reeds. One pair of the inner pedals on this one are shot. Does not explain the lower pressure though. Let's check the lower one. Let's see how the failing reeds would affect boost pressure. They're letting through in that direction. They're not closing so that it can build pressure. I have a suspicion it's my paper gasket between the rotary valve housing and the cylinder though. Paper gasket in the exhaust duct, that might not be such a great idea. Might be it's blown out. We'll have to disassemble and have a look. I'll show you what's going on with the reeds first though. Initially it looks like it's only 2 of the inner pedals of one of the reed blocks that's broken. But let me bring you in closer. These 2 pedals are indeed broken. Something just occurred to me. That's strange. That's really strange. I was going to show you how reeds are supposed to be springy and snap back when you bend them, and how my reeds had become soft and didn't spring back anymore. You see, just a few minutes ago they were softer and did not spring back anymore. Now they do. I thought it would be heat from combustion and pressure that would kill my reeds. Turns out it's just the fuel. Neil Hintz, aka Flettner, aka Uniflow, warned me about this. I think he had talked to Reforce or Boyson maybe. They said the reeds would hold up a little while but eventually fail from the fuel. Alcohol fuel, methanol. Either we'll have to go with a material that won't be affected, steel, or some other resin type reeds, or we could find out how long it takes for the reeds to be affected and then switch them out really frequently. Like for every run. Took apart the rotary valve assembly and there's no sign of damage or leaks on the gasket. It's fine. That's not what's leaking. Maybe there's something going on with the blower. Maybe it's not sealing that well anymore. Or something else. We'll figure it out. Need to think about some stuff. Order some new parts. Order more fuel. We're ending low, but there was a lot of win in this video. The dyno is working great. And I said I was going to test until destruction. It is a prototype. We need to find out what works and what doesn't work and fix it. See you next time.